So as we go through linear relationships, there's going to be some new words for us to get to know. So let's go through the language of linear graphs. Now the very first thing that we need to get to know is what's known as a Cartesian plane. A Cartesian plane is where we draw our graphs on, and it consists of 4 different quadrants. Now the first quadrant on a linear graph is the quadrant that a lot of people are probably familiar with. It's where everything is positive, and it's located in the top right corner here. So we refer to this quadrant as the first quadrant. Then, as we name the other quadrants, we go in an anti-clockwise fashion. So we move over this side, then we move down, then we move across to the right, and we keep going up by one at a time. So in the top left here, this is known as the second quadrant. In the bottom left, this is known as the third quadrant. And in the bottom right, this is known as the fourth quadrant. Now the Cartesian plane is made up of 2 dividing lines. It's made up of this vertical line just in here, and it's made up of this horizontal dividing line just in here. Now we refer to the vertical dividing line as the y-axis, and we refer to the x dividing line as the x-axis. Now as you can see here, anything above this x-axis, the y is positive, but anything below the x-axis, the y is negative. Similarly, anything to the right of the y-axis, x is positive, where anything left of the y-axis, x is negative. So let's go through each quadrant and work out whether y and x is positive or negative. So in the first quadrant, the y is above the x-axis, so the y is positive, and the x is to the right of the y-axis, so the x is positive. In the second quadrant, the y is still above the x-axis, so the y is still positive. But the x is now on the left-hand side of the y-axis, so the x is negative. In the third quadrant, the y is now below the x-axis, so the y is negative. And the x is still on the left-hand side, so the x is still negative. And then in the fourth quadrant, the y is still below the x-axis, so the y is still negative. But the x is now to the right-hand side of the y-axis, so the x is now positive. And now what we've covered is what makes up a Cartesian plane. But let's now have a look at some key points of a linear graph. In front of me now, I have a Cartesian plane with 2 lines drawn on there, the line in green and the line in blue. And I want to go through with you some key points that we can find from these graphs. And let's start with what is known as the y-intercept. Now the y-intercept is the point on a graph where it crosses through the y-axis. So on the green graph, we can see that this crosses through the y-axis right here. So for the green graph, this is known as the y-intercept. Now I can describe the y-intercept as a set of coordinates. To do that, I need to first read what the x-coordinate is, and I'll do that by going from this point and reading it down to the x-axis like this. And I notice that the x-coordinate here is 0. So I put the 0 and I put a comma. Then I describe the y-coordinate. Now the y-coordinate is where this graph intercepts the y-axis. So you can see that the y-coordinate is at 2. So we put the 2 down and we enclose them in brackets. So in the green graph, the y-intercept is at 0, 2. The next thing we can identify in that green graph is the x-intercept. I bet you could guess what that is. It's where this green graph passes through the x-axis, which is right here. So this is known as the x-intercept. And once again, we can describe this as a set of coordinates by first of all identifying what the x-coordinate is at that point. Now the x-coordinate is where it passes through the x-axis at this point. At this case, it's at -1. Then we describe the y-coordinate, so we put a comma here and we look at where does it pass through the y-axis at this point, and it passes through at 0. So our coordinate, enclosed in brackets, for the x-intercept is at -1, 0. Now let's talk a little bit about where these lines intersect with each other. So this point right here, we call this point the point of intersection, which can sometimes be abbreviated to POI. Once again, we can describe the point of intersection with a set of coordinates. We always start with the x-coordinate first. Open up your brackets and then look down to see where the x-coordinate is at that point. And it's at +1. Then we put a comma and we describe the y point. And the y point is going to be at 4. And we close our brackets. So the point of intersection of these two graphs is at 1, 4. Now there is one more part of a Cartesian plane that I just want to point out while I'm here. And that's where the two axes themselves cross over. Now where those two axes cross over is what we call the origin. And the origin always has the coordinates of 0 for the x and 0 for the y. So now we've identified some key points on a linear graph, let's see if you can answer some questions. Now in front of me on the Cartesian plane here, I have the graph of a green straight line and the graph of a blue straight line. Now you might have heard me calling these lines linear lines. Linear means straight line. Now I want you to go through for both the green and the blue line here and identify the y-intercept of each line and the x-intercept of each line. Then I want you to identify the coordinates of the point of intersection of these two lines. Then I want you to see if you can remember what the coordinates of the origin of the Cartesian plane is. Finally, I then want you to think about what quadrant of the Cartesian plane is the point of intersection between these two linear lines.